Hello, and welcome to Haman Nature. I am very excited to have a wonderful human being with me as my interview guest today. This is Bob Murphy. Bob, the good fine people have already heard your basic introduction bio, um, but welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I was excited to hear about this new venture you've launched.
Well, the thing about narcissists, Bob, is we like to we like to talk into the ether and hope other people will listen. You are not a narcissist. You are a genuine smart guy and great guy, and
Those
I am a
can
big
go
fan.
together.
Well,
The
sometimes,
most dangerous narcissists are very smart.
right? And charismatic. What are you up to, Bob? What are you going to do?
Well,
So, I love your Bob Murphy show. I love what you do on with the Mises Institute too, the Human Action podcast, but I like your show better because you get into all sorts of weird and interesting topics that interest me to no end. Even when I think what you're talking about is insane and
mm-hmm,
wrong, it's
mm-hmm.
always interesting. So,
It's like if you met somebody who really thought he was Napoleon
right,
and
you'd
you
want
were
to talk
like
to that guy.
poking holes and trying to see, and it was like, he's really thought this through. Like
Right?
I can't prove that he's not Napoleon.
Like
So,
the psychologist in Terminator. He's just very thrilled with
yeah,
Kyle Reese's story. You can't poke a
exactly.
hole in this. He's got an
Exactly.
answer for
I,
everything.
I like that guy because I thought if I had encountered his name's Kyle, I
Right?
forget. It's kind of,
Kyle
that's how
Reese,
I
I
would
think.
be. I
Yeah.
wouldn't just be like, oh, okay, whatever, dude. I would like, really, tell me more. So
And you'd immediately start writing your dissertation as Skynet took over.
yeah, I would like to think that my dissertation would pave the way to create Skynet. You know what I mean?
It
Like that.
probably would.
Yeah.
So I have a whole bunch of questions for you. But first of all, I want to ask you about the most recent series you've got on your Bob Murphy Show podcast, which is, as you describe it, sort of an homage or following in the footsteps of what Jordan Peterson did with his
Hmm.
psychological impact of at least the first half of the Old Testament. And you're doing something very very similar, an interdisciplinary analysis of the teachings of Jesus Christ. And just tell me what you're all about there. What are you trying to accomplish? You big smarty
Well,
pants,
sure. So
you.
just to clarify, it's commentary on the gospel accounts.
The Gospels. Okay.
So it will include, his teachings, but again, it was just me going through that book. So yeah, as you say, it's been percolating for a while. When I would, read stories, especially from the New Testament, like things would occur to me, and using the machinery that of analyzing social situations that I've developed, first like as an economist, and then just more generally. And at some point, the damn burst that I said, at this point, I feel like I could go through because it's a scary thing to go in. And also too, like with here, I knew I had enough material for the first couple episodes, but now it's not like I thought through, well, what am I going to say? So I imagine it's like when people have a hit TV series and they're like, oh shoot, we like wrote the first 3 episodes and now people like it. And what are we going to do? And let's give him amnesia, so hopefully that won't happen.
I think Larry
So
David was famous with that in Seinfeld. It's like, I got to come up with more episodes.
yeah,
What?
yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm doing a commentary, and yeah, Jordan Peterson was the inspiration in the sense that he's not a trained theologian, obviously, but yet, I found his lectures on the Old Testament to be fascinating, and I think he sort of he like gave permission to educated people to consider those stories and not just be like, oh, okay, this is goofy stuff.
Yeah, I think I told you off air once or twice that's me. You're describing me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a believer, but I found his stories so interesting and useful, or his analysis so interesting and
Yeah.
useful that whether you believe the literal word of the Bible or not, clearly, at the very least, there's wisdom coming down through these stories, especially if you
Mm-hmm.
analyze myths from multiple traditions. You're clearly getting at something about human
Right.
nature,
Right.
and that's, as people know who watch this show, that I'm very interested in that.
Mm-hmm. The problem, I don't know if you saw this stuff, but have you ever seen him? Especially my favorite thing from him. Well, I don't know if it's my favorite, but I love seeing like the old lectures.
Hmm.
Where he's just a young guy in front of his class. It's
In
like one of those,
Toronto,
yeah,
yeah,
those tiered classroom seating.
yeah,
Where the kids in the back are like way above, and he's just talking to him about like Pinocchio. Like he'll
right.
go through and give a whole lecture on Pinocchio. And it, like, that was good and bad for me as a believer, because on the one hand, like, I was mesmerized, like, oh yeah, I never thought about that. He's right. In terms of like Pinocchio going and everything to that Forbidden Island or whatever it was. But then I was like, oh wait a minute. But if he's this animated and able to illustrate all sorts of truths about the human condition with Pinocchio, I don't think Pinocchio was real. And so does that mean his
Ah,
fascinating lectures on the Old Testament, like, because when I heard those, I was like, yeah, these clearly, this is real stuff, because look at how deep it is. But he also showed Pinocchio illustrates a lot too. So,
well, yeah, and his claim is that Pinocchio didn't just rise from the consciousness of, the original author. It's an old story based on old archetypes. So
mm-hmm.
even just the basic character structure and plot of that story goes back a lot further than Disney or whoever.
Can we take a moment and just what's going on there? Like, is there like a selection mechanism that a story that didn't really illustrate some deep truth about human nature wouldn't be passed down, and so like there's a selection bias, and hence the
Yes.
stories that we tell that have been passed down over the ages.
Yes, right down to Superman and Batman. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think we keep telling each other the archetypes of the character types and plot archetypes of things that are meaningful to us. And they'll change a little bit obviously as we evolve culturally and
Mm-hmm.
technologically, but yeah, I think these stories go right to our bones. We can't stop telling the same basic set of stories.
Did you see those M. Night Shyamalan?
Shamanamanaman.
Shyamalan. The what's it? Was it Unbreakable with Bruce Willis,
Love
where
it.
he's
Yeah,
okay?
Mr. Glass, yeah.
Yes. All right. So I was gonna say, because what you said there sounded very similar, and if you hadn't, I was gonna say, oh, go watch those movies, because it's. I think M. Night is saying that, yeah, in a sense, we are, there are superheroes among us, and look inside yourself, and these comic books are capturing something true.
Oh, I think so, and I think artists who went to college, I think they teach you that. I mean, I only dipped my toe in introductory classes in college, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they'll tell you that there's four basic stories or whatever, and they'll talk to you about archetypes and basic
Mm-hmm.
plots that just keep coming up and up. So, have you got all of the structure of your series plotted out, or have you crossed the
No,
bridge without
that's
the planks being built?
right. That's what I was saying earlier. That no, it's a little bit scary, and I go ahead and it, like, because first I feel like I have to listen to a bunch of conventional, uh, you know, preachers and whatever talk about it, just to make sure I'm not missing something basic. That I don't want to like say something dumb that people who are really into studying the Bible would be like, oh come on, how'd you not know that? But it's not that I'm just going and doing like a research paper for you guys. Like, here, I spent 18
Right.
hours listening to these. Let me condense it down and summarize it and do a book report. No, it's just I'm doing that just to make sure I don't, say something ignorant. But yeah, I with the and some of it too. I realized I gave myself permission. I don't have to go through it chapter by chapter, right? Because
Sure.
Jordan Peterson didn't do that, with Genesis either. Like, he would, jump
Nope.
ahead to, oh, then there's this story, and then there's this story, kind of thing. So that's what I'll do, and I know I still have, like, there's certain famous things, like, from the life of Jesus, that I know what I'm gonna say, and so I have like 6 episodes in my head that at the very least I'll do those, and that'll be it. But I'm guessing other stuff will occur to me once I
No,
get
I'm
going.
I'm sure it will, and I can't wait. Like I said, I'm fascinated by it. Uh, yeah, I'm a big fan of your show. And the intro to your show, that guy with the cool Irish voice pops on and says, "Brought to you by a Christian and economist." And I think that's just a bunch of balderdash, Bob. Maybe you're those things, but mostly you're just a math geek. You talk
Oh,
about math in every other show. So I
yeah,
have a
that's
whole
funny that it
list.
happened.
I have a whole list of math questions,
Okay.
and um, many of these questions they just popped into my head as I was watching your show and looking at the. I'm a good student, Bob. I look at the ancillary materials given by the professor. I want to be prepared. So I watched all those other YouTubes about math, and so I have questions, and
Okay.
they are retarded. So
Well, all
please
right.
tell me
Well,
that they're stupid if they are, and
all
please
right.
tell me if they go beyond the depth and breadth of your knowledge,
Okay.
because that could happen too.
I can't multiply 3-digit numbers in my head, just to warn
Well,
you.
then why would anyone listen to you? Dr. Murphy, if you are a real doctor. Let's start with something basic. Um, what the hell is math? And did humans invent it or did we discover it? Like I said, I read the lecture notes, so I know you have an opinion on this. But what do you think? Is there more one than the other?
Okay, so I still think it's more they discover it,
Me too.
but I'm more open to the invention now than I would have been 10 years ago. I think a I was knocked on my keister. Is this, can I say keister or is this a family friendly?
I will bleep it out.
Okay. Um, with the stuff, with the, when I brought Steve Patterson on, I guess it's a
Yeah.
Riemann. I forget what the title of that thing was, but some result that Riemann proved where, real quick for your listeners, it was, hopefully I can do this off the top of my head. It was if you had a conditionally convergent series, like, so adding
Mm-hmm.
up a bunch of positive numbers and a bunch of negative numbers, and if that converged, then you could you could make it add up. You could just change the order of the elements and make it add up to anything you wanted.
The problems with infinite series
Yeah,
is,
and
I
that
think.
just
Yeah.
that just blew my mind. And like I said, no, that to me what that meant was we did something wrong. Like
I
whatever
agree. I
assumptions we
agree.
made earlier in our decisions about, well, because you start out with a basic, arithmetic, and that seems pretty airtight. And then you start going and you drive some triangles and stuff. And okay, I don't see anything too wrong with that. But then you start defining infinitely big sets and blah, and there's cardinality and there's this, and there's more real numbers between 0 and 1 than there are integers. And you start getting into all these kind of weird things. And then something that's to me sounded crazy when I first heard it popped out. Then I just said, okay, we must have, like if you're doing a standard proof and you end up with saying like 1 equals 0, you stop. You say, okay, we must have done something wrong. Let's go see what happened because this shouldn't be popping out.
Yeah, I think that's the truth. I think it's something we discover and it applies it clearly applies to the real world and we're really
Mm-hmm.
impressed with ourselves and the power of what we've invented. But then we forget to continually go back and ground each step that we make, and so we come up with absurdities. I think I think when we start inventing too much,
Mm-hmm.
we start to make errors. On the other hand, when we invent, we discover new things and it turns out to be true. That happens in physics all the
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah. And I just love the fact that I've had, was it, I think it's what I had Ian on the math, like the true day job mathematician who came
Yeah.
on to kind of set the record straight. And I did have him come on. What's funny is I'll say for the listeners too here, I am not engaging in hyperbole to make it a better story or something. I mean, it's not going to be that good of a story either way, but I'm not. I promise you, I'm not exaggerating. I got more hate mail because of the episode where I had Steve Patterson on and we were throwing stones on the mathematician's use of, notions of infinity and things like that. And how do you manipulate infinite sets and blah, blah, blah. Than I've gotten on anything. Even the passive. Before that, I would have said the pacifism stuff. Like,
Right.
holy cow, you should have seen some of the emails some of the LouRockwell.com people sent me.
Well, they know you're not going to fight back, so they can pile
Exactly
on.
right. Yeah, I was asking for it. Especially see how I was dressed. So that's I mean that anyway. So it was just kind of funny the vitriol that we got from that.
And because you're talking about theological stuff all the time, I find it interesting. Usually people get the most angry when you undercut or assault their religion, which makes me wonder. If you do a math debunking sort of show and people get that mad,
Mm-hmm.
is it an ideology? Is it a religious structure that you've assaulted?
Oh, well, I've said that Steve Landsberg is the most religious atheist I know. And I
Right.
and I mean that like literally, and I know I mean it as a compliment to him, and I think he knows I
Right.
mean it as a compliment. That yeah, like I'm not exaggerating. If somehow someone demonstrated there was an actual contradiction in math, I think Steve would have to go jump off a bridge, or he would use a lot of drugs or something and just go like he wouldn't. I don't think the universe would make sense to him.
I get that. I mean, if you've structured your life so deeply
Mm-hmm.
around something and then all of a sudden it gets knocked out, I mean, people go nuts like that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, complex numbers, Bob, do you understand them?
Oh, yeah. Hang on one second. I will come to. I started a train of thought. I didn't finish it. So my point in all that huge digression was to say, you asked me, is math discovered or invented? I
Yeah.
used to be totally clearly discovered. It's out there. It's objective. And then now with some of this weird stuff, I think, okay, maybe some of it is discovered in the sense that that's not, reality is not making that jump out at us. That's we're choosing to go down this path. And, like, so let's suspend our disbelief
Right.
and go down this. And so then it leads us into what you just asked about, is the so-called imaginary numbers. Well,
Well,
the
before we get
complex.
there,
Yeah.
what you said strikes a memory. I mean, you've watched a lot of Jordan Peterson. Do you know the allegory he tells when you picture a child next to his mother, and then he ventures out and he gets scared, then he comes back, for reassurance, and then he ventures out a little further.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our understanding of math, I think, is kind of like that. We start playing around with these numbers, and they start to reflect reality. That's the grounding. Grounding to reality is coming back to mom, and then
Mm-hmm.
stepping outside of the comfort zone is starting to make stuff up. I think it's like that. You have to have both mental circuits, or you can't explore, right? But if one goes haywire and you start inventing too much and never come back and ground what you're doing to the real world,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you come up with nonsense, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, square root of negative one.
Yeah.
What the
So
hell, man?
this is great. It all dovetails well into what you just were asking. So, yeah, for folks at home, the complex numbers are a mixture. There's a what's called the real component and the imaginary component. So real numbers just 0.247, things like that, pi, um, and then the imaginary, as Adam alluded to there, the fundamental constituent of it is what's called I, and I think I pinned down that the I does stand for imaginary. It's not that Inago discovered all this, and it is defined as the square root of -1. So again, for people who aren't familiar with this, that there's a sense in which that doesn't make any sense, right? Because the square root is saying what number times itself, turns it. So, the square root of 9 is either plus or minus 3. But if you say, what's the square root of -1, you're saying what times itself equals -1, and nothing does it, because two positive numbers, times themselves is positive, and same with two negative numbers. But yet, instead of just stopping there and saying, okay, so this is nonsensical, let's move on to something real, they said, no, let's just go with it and say, suppose there is this thing I, which we define as the square root of -1. And I think, so Adam, this is where we've gone away from discovering objective math, and now we're branching off into imaginary. That's what so I like, they're kind of cheeky about it, call it imaginary numbers as contrasted with real numbers, right? So they're admitting, just in the terms they gave, that, yeah, this isn't real. But yet, so it's cool. Like, you can, the Mandelbrot set, like that's a very simple recursive definition involving a complex number. And you wouldn't look at that and say, oh, there's nothing there. Like, it's trippy, which is fitting since it's imaginary. But yet also it's entirely useful in electromagnetism. Like, you use complex numbers there. And so it's not that there's no practical, to build computers, we needed the mathematicians to play around with, let's suppose there's this thing called I.
No, we need this math to operate our complex society, but you're jumping way ahead.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just lost. Um, like, I understand the Cartesian plane, and I understand the point of having real numbers on the x-axis and real numbers on the y-axis, and plotting functions and all sorts of the interesting, useful things you can do. Do you understand what, and in a sense, you're describing reality, at least in the sense that you're describing a plane.
Mm-hmm.
But do you understand what they're doing by putting real numbers on the x-axis and imaginary numbers on the y-axis? Do they have a reason for even doing that, or?
Well, the same reason you plot y equals mx plus b, just it helps you think through the pattern, the big picture of it. You understand things about it better by looking at the graph. If you're asking, so again, for folks, the way you go and plot, if you had an XY coordinate paper and you said, show me the point that's 3, 2i, because a complex number is a pair, the real component. And what you do is you on the x-axis you go for the real thing, left or right. So if it's positive 3, you go to the right 3. If it's negative 3, you go left 3. And then the I is defined as going up in the y direction. So 3i, you would go up, that. So if you're asking me, Adam, was there any significance between the x versus the y? No, I think you could have easily interchanged it. It's just more intuitive to put the thing we know better as the x-axis. And yeah, when you say, like, well, what does it mean? You're right. It's not real. They're calling it imaginary. And so, it's not right, I don't think, to say, oh yeah, that's what the plot looks like, because no, there's no such, I is an imaginary number. This doesn't make sense. But yet again, like with the Mandelbrot set, that they did plot that, so what does that mean? It's the contours of a mountain that doesn't exist in the real world, but it does exist in the imaginary world. Ooh, I don't think that's a false statement I just said.
It's for sure not a false statement, especially if you do a bunch of drugs and then set that Mandelbrot, where you dive into it and then it keeps changing, except it's not changing. It's the same. And whoa, dude, what are we looking at? So I got 2 quick questions. Well, they're not quick. None of my questions are quick. So yes, this creepy math that's all made up and shouldn't reflect anything is the undergirds all of our society. So can you talk about how these imaginary numbers affect, our understanding of physics, and how electrical engineering needs this math? Do you understand how the one impacts the other? Because I sure don't.
Okay, so I know for sure that, yeah, if you're taking physics and you get to the class on electromagnetism, then you use it. Like the equations that just describe, I don't know if it's Maxwell's laws, but the equations that describe that stuff, they use I in there. Now, if you ask me, suppose mathematicians had never discovered I and it just never gone down that path, are you saying to this day we wouldn't understand how to model electricity? I don't know enough about it to be able to say whether that's true. So a while ago, I think I may have said something to that effect. So maybe that was an overstatement. But certainly I think the fact that they had I and all that complex numbers just sitting on the shelf, I think allowed the physicists to more quickly model electricity and magnetism in a way that gave predictive power. That's the thing. Like, I don't believe in the Copenhagen interpretation of, quantum physics. Like, as Einstein said, God doesn't play dice. I agree with that.
Yeah.
So, but I don't deny that while those equations gave them really accurate predictions in terms of like particle colliders and being able to go build transistor circuit boards.
Well, the way I look at it, and I could just be making stuff up, but I think we're looking through a glass darkly. Like we've sort of figured out enough about. We don't understand how it works, but we understand like some equations that help us build things that do work. And I think we just we're in that middle step where we can make fire, right? But we don't understand, how carbons burn or what the atom is.
Would you do this especially as a kid? I would just sit there and look at the fire, and because it's not even touching,
all night.
It's like hovering. And I was just, and even as I learned more physics, like I was trying to, I guess chemistry is more important there than physics per se, but anyway, yeah, I just always thought that was fat. Can you imagine if it's that mystifying to us, people, 6,000 years ago or something, like, or the one who literally discovered fire and like kept it. There was some movie,
Prometheus.
Like there was some movie. I'm trying to remember if I actually saw it or if my uncle just told me, and like if sometimes you like remember seeing something like this because you imagined it. So maybe I didn't see it, but he was saying how, there was some movie, but they discovered fire, and this one tribe had it. And then there was a big war because the other tribe wanted to get the fire. And then in the conflict, oh no, the thing that they kept it going with was extinguished, just snuffed out. And oh no, we've lost it. And then, the invading tribe goes home in dejection. And then it seems like that. And then some little person, comes forward and explains to the tribal chief that that's no problem. I know how to make fire. You know, and they're like, oh,
Ooh.
like they
Oh, you're
realize this
chief.
person's worth.
Right, right, right,
So,
right.
and to us, but anyway, they did a good job. And did you see Castaway with Tom Hanks?
Of course.
So they did a good job with it. If you remember how he's like, oh, me make fire. And then when he
Yeah,
gets
the emotion
rescued,
of finally being able to do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then when they rescue him and he's like at some catered party and he takes out like the I think the long thing you light candles with, and he's just and just seeing it and just like, wow.
This has nothing to do with nothing, but one of my favorite lines in that movie is when he's been rescued
Mm-hmm.
and he's still, sort of traumatized, and he's holding a cocktail glass, with ice in it. And he's just this is civilization. I have
Yeah.
ice in my glass.
Yeah.
Little
Yeah.
things we take for granted. Um, yeah. So no, I think that's where we're at intellectually. We've understood enough how to make the thing work, but we don't understand what's going on. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and that just amazes me that we can build all these things, and I still think, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, maybe a professor could educate me, but I don't think we understand why these things are working. We just know how to make them work.
Exactly. Yep. And I have thoughts like that because I have right now, what is he, like 15-month-old, and just to see him, grappling with stuff, and there's certain things that are dangerous, and if I see him like and he just has no idea, he doesn't understand, like, oh, if I touch the wrong thing, I'm dead, or if I crawl out in the wrong thing, I'm dead. What does dead mean? How does he, and so, and then I think often like, well, humans must be like that, from, if you believe in God, from God's vantage point, we're grappling and. We could come close to unleashing some virus that wipes out humanity or blowing us up or opening up, opening a black hole or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's like my son playing near the power outlet. And he has no clue. So,
That's right. So I don't know where to go next. Speaking of weird numbers, E is a pretty cool number. Seems like it's pretty fundamental to something. I mean, what's it all about? Geometric growth, or what does that number mean to you?
I
And I'm going to
res-
ask you later about how do you say his name? Euler's identity.
sure. Okay. Yeah. I resist. This might sound weird, but like I loved pi when I was little and I understood it. I didn't know it's to its full completion because how could I? But
Still don't.
just the concept of it and everything like was great. And for whatever reason, E intimidated me. Like
Hmm.
and I think because I knew it only in, I knew, I'd taken a calculus class and they said, E is like the thing that is the derivative of itself, like what's the derivative? E to the X is E to the X. And so like that seemed like that's a property of it, but not what it was. And then it would pop out in economics. You see it all the time with growth, like you said, because we usually deal with rates of change. And then when you want to say, okay, but at any given time t, what's the size of the economy or what's the debt level or blah, and E would always end up in those things. And and I don't know. So I was kind of intimidated by it, but yeah, that's the way it ends up being used a lot for compound exponential growth. But it is a number. It's 2.7. Da, 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 da. Like that's what it is. It's a constant, but it has a lot of these interesting properties.
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
actually, and I mentioned, I think in the episode, so I was watching some, math videos about it or YouTube videos about it, and they think that they discovered that, E to the X, the derivative was E to the X, that bankers realized that before,
Right.
like Leibniz and Newton developed differential calculus.
Yeah. If you're
Right.
thinking
So
about compound growth every day,
yeah.
this might come to you in a fevered dream.
Yeah, because where it comes in for folks at home, it's when you're doing stuff like, oh, like suppose I got paid 10% interest, annually, and then you could be like, oh, well, what would happen though if you got 2.5% every quarter, and then
Hmm.
you would actually end up with more, right, than 10% if you did it that way.
Sure.
And then if you just keep dividing up the annual return into an average slice, like meaning the mean, and just kept doing that, the total, the actual compound rate over the course of the year would be higher than the 10%, the more finely. And then they would just took the limit and just said, It's like you could do a daily compounding, and that would be higher than hourly compounding and minutely compounding, and by the second,
Right.
and then the term is continuously compounding, and that just means take the limit is the time interval shrinks to zero. And yes, Adam, as you say, like the bankers knew, oh yeah, if it's 10% simple interest over the course of the year, continuously compounding, you use this calculation, this is blah 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 what it would be. And so they knew how to do that. And my joke was like they figured out like what's the most we can wring out of these people. Like that's the most we could plausibly say is the size of the interval is zero. We couldn't really say it's negative time passage. That doesn't make sense. But
And let them figure out how big a toaster they can give away for signing up.
yeah.
So tell me about Euler's identity and what do you think it means? Does it mean anything or is it just something that's kind of neato?
Okay, so what in the context here is the reason I talk about it. Gene Callahan's the one that really is it shined or shone a spotlight on it. One
I'm
of
going to
those
go with
two.
shown.
Okay.
No. Damn it, now I don't know.
Doesn't that sound? Yeah, if you think about it, then you're not sure. I should have just
Shined. Shown.
because they both sound wrong. It's not that they both sound right. They both sound.
You got to
wrong.
say either one with confidence,
Yeah,
and then it'll
yeah.
be okay.
Yeah. I got the shine. So what Gene had posted saying something like a short proof of the existence of God. And he
Right.
later admitted that was hyperbole. It wasn't proof, but he just
I
meant,
would hope.
come on.
Yeah.
So what it is, well, it's this relation that there's a more general formula, but then this is called the identity if you plug in a certain value for one of the variables. And it's, this constant E raised to the power of pi times I plus 1 equals 0. And the reason that's astonishing is it's linking, so E, which we talked about, pi, which everybody knows, the ratio of diameter and circumference of a circle, and I, which is the square root of -1. So those things seem like they have, E's with compound growth and so forth, and the pi has to do with circles, and I is the square root of -1. Why the heck would those have anything to do with each other? And yet they all come together, and then plus 1 equals 0. Like, 1 and 0 are pretty fundamental things too. So it's just like
It's even
amazing.
freakier when a mathematician will, on his YouTube video, demonstrate this with the Cartesian plane, the eye on the vertical, and then he'll spin up a little graph and show it converging on -1. However they set the equation up. I don't know. It's freaky, and I don't understand what's going on. So I thought you could maybe tell me what it was all about.
Well, yeah. So it goes back to what it was interesting. I wasn't expecting this. I originally was watching the math video because the title was something like, what would happen if banks paid imaginary interest rates or something? And so they're saying, what if the interest rate, instead of being 10%, was I? What would that mean? And so since, I got a dissertation on capital interest theory and I'm a nerd who likes imaginary numbers and that kind of stuff, I thought, well, I have to watch this. It's kind of like in my job description. And so he was going through, and then as an offshoot, so you're right, Adam, the way he was just plotting it and saying, okay, so after one time period, you would earn this, and he did it, and then I'm getting a little mixed up, but it was like, so from your guys' point of view, right? Like, am I doing this? Yeah. Like
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah.
And it's backwards for me, so that's why I'm mixed up. So the idea was that, if he paid him, how'd that work?
Well, in one time period, you have zero money and some imaginary money.
So
and
pi
two,
is going this way. Yeah,
you're negative 100%.
Yeah. So in terms of radians, like what would it mean to do rotation? That pi it means. So if originally it's going this way, and you say I is up there, and if you waiting pi periods is like, and so it goes that way, and then so that's how so it's the answer is -1, and that's why that thing plus 1 equals 0, right? So anyway, just seeing him graph it like that, it jumped out at me. So like I said, that's why that relation now works. So yeah, it is counterintuitive, and what does it mean? It's an imaginary number, but given that we're going to say, okay, let's say that the square root of -1 is this thing called I, and let's also stipulate that moving up in the y-axis means you're moving more into the complex plane, then yeah, that's what the graph would look like.
It's so tempting when you're thinking about math, and you can see something profound is kind of happening. That's why people famously start making God quotes in reference
Mm-hmm.
to this sort of thing. Did you ever read that book Contact by Carl Sagan?
No.
Well, I assume he's an atheist, but you know who Carl Sagan is, right? Famous
Yeah, the
PBS Nova
billions and
guy.
millions guy. Yeah.
Yeah, so he wrote this book of fiction, and
They made a movie about it, right?
they made a movie about Jodie Foster, I think.
Yes.
Yeah,
They're
and his
scientists. They need a poet.
and his MacGuffin is the number pi. The plot is that scientists finally built a big, huge, powerful computer and calculated pi out to enough digits where you started getting a message from God in binary. And when you plot it
I need
out,
to
you get
rewatch that movie because
it's
no, I
pretty
don't remember
great.
that being in there.
Pretty
Did the
great.
movie capture that, or did they just abstract away from those
I
specifics?
mean, it's a movie, so it was probably pretty quick, but yeah, it was in
Okay.
there.
Okay,
And
I
I
need to
don't
go
know
rewatch that.
when I'm looking at Euler's identity, and when I understand what the Mandelbrot set actually is, and then I watch how freaky and
Mm-hmm.
you start thinking if you just tilted your head sideways 45 degrees and closed one eye, maybe you'd start seeing a message
Well,
from somebody.
it's fun. I mean, Isaac Newton was all into that stuff. Do you know that?
Mm.
Like,
Wasn't he an
I guess,
alchemist too?
yes. Would you call it
Yeah,
numerology, maybe? But
yeah.
yeah, like he thought there were codes, in I think probably you had to go read it in the original languages in the Bible, and he was like trying to compute stuff. And yeah, he thought.
Wouldn't
I don't
you?
know if he thought the two would intersect with each other, like if the Bible contained codes for how you could, engage in what we would call alchemy. Um, I don't know. So he definitely did both enterprises. I don't know if he thought they were connected or if those were just separate hobbies he had. But
Well, it sort of makes
yeah,
sense if you're just drawing signs in the dirt, and and your equations start to predict the movement of these lights in the sky.
yeah.
I mean,
I
you
mean,
got to think you're decoding something essential.
yeah. I don't think. Oh, what am I trying to say? A lot of people, if you say who's the greatest physicist, Einstein's a clear candidate, and some people might say some other ones or whatever. But I think what Isaac Newton did, just again to like figure, oh, you know what? What if the same thing that makes an apple fall is the same thing that makes the moon go around? Like that's kind of a big idea, and then to be able to figure out an equation that approximates it pretty closely, like that's kind of amazing. And yeah, like you say, somebody who stumbled on that, it's not insane to think, well, maybe there's codes in the Bible that would help me turn lead into gold. Why not? That's no
Right?
less plausible than F equals ma. Oh wow, everything makes sense now. Now I
Yeah.
know
How
what
are you going
Venus
to
is going to be.
distinguish between miracles? I mean, they both are going to
Mm-hmm.
look like freaking miracles, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Fascinating. All right. What about, since you brought it up, kind of? What about gravity? Do you think? Do you think warped space time makes sense if you're not completely stoned, or is it some kind of a field we don't understand, or what the heck's going on?
So it's funny. I did a class project on that, illustrating general relativity. So if people have ever seen it, there's cool diagrams they'll have in a physics book where it's like a grid, and then there's like a
Yeah.
heavy. It looks like a
Yeah.
bowling ball if you put it, on a foam
Yeah.
cushion or something, and how and it goes in. And so, well, that's what Einstein's theory was of general relativity, not special, was that there's space time which is curved uh, based on how massive an object is. And so, like if you see a comet going, and it and here's a massive planet, and it goes around it, it's not that there's this gravitational force that pulled the comet and accelerated it, and that's why its motion changed. It's that space itself is curved around the planet, so it's still moving in a straight line. It's just the straight line looks curved because space time itself gets warped. So, the predictions of that model are more accurate than of the Newtonian model. So that's why in physics that's what counts. That's why we have a winner.
But again, we
Mhm.
got to make a distinction between math that makes good predictions and a theory that really is elucidating what's going on. You know, those two
Yeah.
things don't have to be the same, and they're not a
Oh,
lot.
right, right, totally. And I definitely agree that the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, I don't think it's true. It's
I don't
correct.
either.
So yes, for sure, predictive power. I'm just saying that's what wins the game in physics. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Like, do fields exist? It's funny. Like, it's spooky action at a distance. Like when you take two magnets and you can
Yeah, I
feel
was
it.
just about to
That's
bring that
weird.
up. I mean, the rotation of the Earth's core, it produces magnetic fields, right? We can see them. Yeah, I'm a field guy. I don't know what's going on, but I think it's got to have to do with fields. I don't understand warped space time. I ain't buying it. I ain't going for it.
Oh well, I don't know that those are mutually exclusive. Like I think they would say there's still a gravitational field, even in the warp space time
Do they? I
paradigm.
thought it was two different theories.
I mean,
I don't know.
for
I'm not
sure,
sure.
you're right. Newtonian mechanics, they would talk about a gravitational field. So yes, I'm just saying I don't know that they jettison the idea of a field in the Einsteinian framework. Like maybe it's the field that is what maintains the curvature because it's not like the massive object is touching everything.
Right. But yeah, you're right. Well, unless it's touching it in some way, we can't. We got the wrong detector. You know, we got the wrong instrument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have a whole bunch more questions along this line, but I think we're going to put those behind the subscriber paywall over on Substack. And I'm going to ask you a little something not more mundane, but just something more about all the other things that you're doing. Tell me about um, your favorite institution in mine, the Mises Institute, and what you're doing over there, and also what you're doing with the infinite banking concept and the blockchain and the company that you're involved in.
Okay, sure. So, yeah, the Mises Institute, they recently, have announced that Tom DiLorenzo now is the president, and so that's interesting because, he's been such a pugilist in the debates over various things. He's a funny guy because you go see him in person. He's very charming and just sort of laid back and gives his presentation, but yet he's pretty punchy online if
Yes,
he
he
thinks
is.
somebody's out of line. And he writes some books about Lincoln that are not complimentary. Uh,
It's the darndest thing. What is it? The beard? Is it the hat? What doesn't he like
yeah,
about it?
it's yeah, it could be. I think all the above. So his debating style. So yeah, that's exciting. I host, as you say, the weekly Human Action podcast. I just recorded my response to James Lindsay, so I'm eager for that to come out.
Hmm.
And his saying national divorce is national suicide was his claim. And yeah, so it's good there. I like having that forum because I do think it's important for there to be this outlet uh, saying, "Hey, what's the Austrian economics take on some issue?" That I think that's a
Absolutely.
valid perspective to keep alive. And then with Infinio, yes, there we're using whole life insurance that's designed and customized for cash management. What Nelson Nash called the infinite banking concept, and we are putting it on the blockchain. And so, just to give one example, the kind of thing we're doing, if we can get a bunch of whole life policies that people were going to surrender, and we intercept that and say, whoa, we our licensed subsidiaries or partners will buy those from you, so the people get a higher spot payment than they would have gotten from just turning it back into the carrier, so they're happier. The carrier's actually happier because these are policies they would have wanted to stay in force. Like these people are healthy. It's just they can't, afford to keep their policies up.
Right.
And so the carrier's happy. They, oh, okay, yeah, instead of us paying on a boatload of money and surrender value, redemption, we keep getting premiums. And then like we can take them and either find an individual home for them or put them in a pool and then issue digital tokens that are, fractional claims on that. And so just that kind of stuff. There's a lot of interesting properties with life insurance as an asset class, but because it's so uh, rigid right now and lumpy, and there's a lot of transaction costs, it doesn't make, you're an institutional money manager and you're getting in and out of bonds and stocks and real estate.
Yeah.
You're not going to be getting in and out of life insurance the way it is currently, but we're trying to get to the point where you could be like, oh yeah, I want to put 5% of my portfolio in permanent life insurance. And so we're just making it easy to be able to do that on the fly.
No, it's super exciting. Make the market, less rigid, more fluid, get more people into it. Have you rolled out a viable product yet, or are you just still trying to put it together?
No, we're still building the infrastructure. But yeah, I think by the end of this year, we will have, certainly very soon, we're going to have what's called a policy ledger that's posted, where if you have a life insurance policy, you can upload like a PDF of the latest, what's called an illustration, in-force illustration. And then that allows you to like chart it and do things like, oh, what if I took out a loan here, and then when my kid's 18 and paid it back and did this, or how many cars could I buy? And, you can chart things like that. You just use your policy a lot better. And then, yeah, shortly thereafter, then we're going to, once the blockchain that our partners are helping us design access to, and, to launch the token, then we'll link it. So you link your policy. So yes, that was my long way of saying it's not currently available, but it's underway and we're rolling out the various components shortly.
Do you have a sense whether you're going to be able to, I don't know, quote unquote, corner the market on this thing and get filthy rich? Or is it just the kind of thing where once you've demonstrated that this works and it makes the market more, quote unquote, efficient, is just everybody going to immediately pop in there and all of a sudden this concept will be just more available for all people without these obstacles?
Yeah. So like we wonder, like, do we have a moat around what we're doing?
Right.
So yeah, I'm not worried. I mean, we're really, at the office, and we're trying to, keep the intensity up in here. I think we will be first to market, just because there's a lot. We had a lot of false. It's kind of like the way they report that what was it called? The Oppenheimer. What is that enterprise called? What they were doing?
The Manhattan Project?
Yes, the Manhattan Project. I wanted to say that, and I was like, wait, but it wasn't in Manhattan, right?
Cillian
the
Murphy?
Manhattan Project. What? Yeah. So that was, how a lot of that was more, there were lots of different false turns they made, and, dead ends in terms of so that's kind of the thing that, there's a lot of things we had to go down paths. We had to say, oh, wait a minute, no, this doesn't work, and then back up a little bit and to get to where we are. So I'm not worried that somebody else is going to get to market 2 weeks before we do. But you're right. I haven't really thought as much about, once we're up and running, how hard would it be for people to reverse engineer what we did? Since again, there's a lot of moving parts in what we're doing, I think we'll, have first mover advantage for a while, but yeah, it's not.
You'll have first mover advantage, and if I understand it right, it'll be such a weird thing. It's just going to take a while for the big boys, quote unquote, to even understand what's happening.
Yeah, and I tell myself that because we meet with various people, because the deal is what we're doing. You kind of need to know 4 areas decently to get what we're doing, and so most people we talk to only know 2 of the area. You know what I mean? And so still, it seems like what we're doing, well, that doesn't make sense, because what about this? And we're like, well, yeah, see, what you don't know is this thing over here, and that, and so sometimes you get frustrated, but then on the other hand, you're like, well, no, that's actually good, because this is why we're going to be first to market, because it really is, this rare thing, and most people aren't going to see it.
No, it's exciting. I hope that really comes in big for you guys. Well, like I said, I have a bunch more really cool, interesting questions, but we're going to wind down this public part of the interview. And before we go,
I've tried to keep my interest level, I want it to be not boring, but not interesting per se.
Don't peak yet.
I'm saving
Calm
for
down.
paying customers.
Think about baseball. Slow down. But before we go, would you like to direct people who are interested in the great and talented and genius Robert P. Murphy? Where can we find all the things you do?
Sure. So the podcast is bobmurphyshow.com. On Twitter, some people think I'm amusing. You might check it out. I'm Bob Murphy Econ. And then the stuff we're doing at Infinio, it's INFINEO.ai is our website, infinio.ai. And there's a lot of cool stuff there you can check out.
Well, we will link to all that in the description of this video. And yes, Bob, you are very amusing on Twitter when you are decipherable. You are either completely impenetrable, you can't understand you,
The
or you're
Sphinx.
hilarious. A sphinxish,
Okay, so
exactly.
the fact that you're saying that means maybe I need to cut people some slack. Because I
Right?
get so mad. I'm like, they don't even get what I'm saying. And apparently, no, Bob, we don't.
I usually do, but sometimes it takes a minute,
You
man.
know, what happens sometimes too, joking aside, is I forget that people have their is curated the word I want. I was going to say curated feeds. In
Yeah,
other words, when we all log into Twitter and start scrolling, we're not seeing the same tweets.
of course, yeah, of
And
course.
so sometimes I forget that. And if I, especially like if I see 4 out of 50 tweets are all about the same thing in my mind, oh, everyone's talking about this.
Right.
And so I'll
That
make
ain't
some
true.
reference, I'll subtweet it, I guess would be the word I want, thinking, oh, they're all going to get that this is an allusion to this thing over here that's hot right now. And no, and not because they're dumb, but because duh, Bob, not everyone, is getting inundated with that because they have different interests and follow different people. So, word to the wise kids, just be careful before you tweet sarcastically.
The man ain't wrong. All right, good people. Thank you so much for tuning in to Haman Nature. Please like, please subscribe. Please go to hamannature.substack.com. I put out a, a daily email blog post Monday through Friday. And you also get links to this show and my other show, which is Natural Order Podcast. You can find that everywhere podcasts are presented to the listening public. Thank you so much, Bob. You're one of my favorite people in the world, and I really appreciate you coming on and doing my show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to do it.